I'm starting what was the only sort of, as an umbrella term, conservative libertarian school paper that's folded in the wake of the Milo riots. So there's been no paper like ours for about 7 years. And so I finished my undergraduate, my degree requirements. And this has kind of just been my something that to try and redeem my time here this fall. And I had invited you through the College Republicans, last I guess it was last fall.
Right.
And there's more of a market for the sort of YAF crowd that's like not as intellectual and is just more sort of political. But I wanted to get you here, and there's a bunch of people I want to get on the show, including you. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah.
You've also, I had Cynical Theories on pre-order. I guess I was thinking back, it must have been around August in 2020. So I was trying to remember how long ago that was. But I mean, I don't know if anyone's described it this way, but it's really, it's a lot of the conversations in philosophy in the academy are just, such small questions, and they're just like totally tone deaf to what's actually going on in the world. And if someone were to write, a contemporary relevant philosophy book, especially yours, it's an analysis of stuff that is actual and real issues. It's I don't know if anyone's given you can be, for the California Review paper, I deem you honorary philosopher.
I've had worse. I've been labeled worse. I just gave a talk actually the other day, and my bio in the program said that I'm a provocateur, so that was pretty exciting. I don't think I am, maybe a little bit on social media, but social media is just a silly place anyway. And so it's kind of a, when in Rome sort of thing. Cynical Theories, that would have been probably August 2020. That's when it came out. We actually wrote it in 2018 and delivered the manuscript in the end of August, 31st of August, 2019. So, it turned out that COVID delayed it by some time. And it landed at kind of a perfect moment for people to be grasping for answers for what had just happened in their country. And it's unfortunate that I couldn't give the answer then that I can give now, because I think it would have made a much bigger difference. But maybe not.
How would the answer be different now?
Well, at the time, first of all, the book, Cynical Theories, is geared toward uncovering the postmodernist elements of the philosophy. And, Helen Pluckrose and I wrote the book together. And Helen, actually, a lot of people don't know this or don't believe it, I guess, given the book. But Helen's actually a leftist. And she's very drawn to the materialist critiques of society, which is to say things that hedge closer to actual Marxism. So there was this tension between us when we were writing the book. I mean, we got along well to write it, but there was this tension between us where she didn't believe, as a matter of fact, that Marxism itself was relevant. In fact, this postmodernism is at best post-Marxist, but also offers its own pretty scathing critique of Marxism. So it's not Marxist. And then she consulted with a philosopher friend of hers who is a critical theorist, And he said, no, this is a postmodern perversion of Marxism. It has nothing to do with Marxism, blah, blah, blah. And she took that all the way. I would have gone the other way. I would have made the book much more about critical theory, although I wasn't as knowledgeable about critical theory at the time. And I also would have made, if I were writing the book now, I would have characterized the entire identity politics phenomenon and intersectionality as a reconstruction of Maoist identity politics that Mao used during the Cultural Revolution to transform China, which I had no knowledge of at the time.
Yeah, you see this tension in the question, why can you be transsexual, but you can't be trans race, right? This is the tension between the skeptics of postmodernism and, the fact that you need realism as an antecedent to do your Marxian dialectics, right? So here's the divide, and I think in that regard that the sort of postmodern, ideas that underlie the sort of post-structural, postmodern people, they're because they're skeptics and nothing's real, et cetera, they can sort of steal freely from the other side. It can be a means to an end, in that sense. You're sort of so. I think that kind of gets that sort of divide in the ideas of the book. It's interesting that you would have made it more, as far as the dialectical critical theory people with regards to Maoism. But yeah, that is, I think, an important distinction when looking at this stuff. The sort of methods of the postmoderns and the methods of the dialecticians. Of course, it does get complicated.
Yeah, I mean, what we're dealing with is ultimately, mostly we were dealing with critical theorists who have picked up postmodern disregard for reality, or postmodern constructivism. There was actually an educator in the early 2000s. He died in 2008, named Joe Kinchelow. And Joe Kinchelow was a critical pedagogue, so he studied and developed critical pedagogy at McGill University in Canada. And Kinchelow put forth this concept, this idea that he calls critical constructivism. Now, I had stumbled across this term. I don't recall, I'd have to look to see if the term critical constructivism appears anywhere in Cynical Theories, but I had certainly stumbled across this term before we wrote Cynical Theories. And when I read the description of critical constructivism for the first time, which was just the Wikipedia summary, the very first time I encountered it, I said, "Holy crap! This is a summary of the thing we call woke." And it took time to be able to figure out what in the world it is, which is a little bit funny and ironic because Jordan Peterson had already given it a different name of his own creation, which was postmodern neo-Marxism. Yeah. So the neo-Marxism is the critical part and the postmodernist is the constructivist part. But that allows them to dabble back and forth kind of fluidly between realist and anti-realist philosophical or metaphysical underpinnings, or, I was going to say subpositions, but assumptions is the word I was looking for. It allows them to be very fluid as to whether or not they want to do a more materialist critique, like we usually tend to see in critical race theory, but not always, or whether we see a vastly more postmodernist constructivist critique like we see in queer theory. And then somehow those two things have got to be hammered together. And the tool that allows it to be hammered together is this thing called critical constructivism, which says we're going to analyze the world from a constructivist position, that our experience of reality is in fact dictated by the constructions of power around us. So that when you and I, and that we're different people with different backgrounds, view the same object even in physical reality, we don't view the same object. We view an object that may or may not exist in physical reality, and overlaid with that object is our perception of that object and all of its various, encoded meanings. So, if I see a computer, maybe I see it as an opportunity to, get my message out. And when you see a computer, maybe you see it as a means by which the state can do surveillance on us in a new way or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So we bring our own interpretation, or if we want to take up one of their narratives, that they suggested that Black people don't know how to use computers at one point. And so they would suggest, although I don't think any Black people think this is true, that a Black person sees a computer and sees it as an impediment to operate in society, or an ID, or the DMV, or any of these kinds of things. And so they figured out a way, basically. And I could not have articulated anything like this at the time. They figured out a way to create a hodgepodge kind of philosophy that allows what Gramsci called organic intellectuals to become the only kind of knowledge producers. And an organic intellectual is, or the short version, is somebody who has lived experience that has been interpreted through a Marxist lens. Or a neo-Marxist lens, in this case, Western Marxist lens, critical Marxist. And so they created this very ad hoc philosophy that allows them to do this kind of thing. And they've deployed it. Like I said, this guy was an educator. They deployed it first in schools. They deployed it first on education students, actually, not even, in K through 12. The test bed was on college students who were going to become teachers. And it's really become this kind of disaster. Of course, it worked its way out through the university from there. But I wish at the time I could have articulated that to give a clearer theoretical underpinning. But the action, what people needed to understand about what was happening in 2020, which is what drew them to cynical theories in the first place, is that we were watching a cultural revolution, just like from China, with its own unique characteristics. We were watching a cultural revolution unfold in our country. And while cynical theories came close to giving that kind of a articulation, it did not have the depth and the accuracy to be able to do it at the time.
Well, you've done enough. I can tell it seems to me that their tensions are high with the election, and I just want to assure you that hindsight, maybe 50-50, and it made an impact. It sounded like, you could sort of hear the tones of it coming from the higher positions in government, if I'm not mistaken. And I think, but that's so the Gramsci thing. They're called what intellectuals?
Organic intellectuals.
I don't know.
Yeah, so Antonio Gramsci is pretty widely considered the father of cultural Marxism. And one of his ideas that differed from Lenin, and that's kind of what this was about. It was kind of like a pissing match between various schools of thought for how to implement Marxism. And so Lenin had taken up an alternative model, which was the vanguard model.
Right. The Pete Buttigieg thing is always very an entertaining little factoid.
Yeah, Pete Buttigieg's father translating Gramsci into English is something that should raise a lot of eyebrows in the United States.
Yeah, do with that what you will.
Yeah, do with that whatever you want. Pete Buttigieg's father translated Gramsci. With this pissing match in the 1910s and early 1920s, what Lenin put forth is this model he called the vanguard model, that the intellectuals should form a vanguard of the revolution because the proletariat, and particularly the peasants, who Lenin didn't have any respect for at all, didn't seem to know that they were supposed to do a revolution. And the workers' parties, which were small, still wouldn't even organize themselves. They couldn't get their act together. And so Lenin decided that his Bolshevik party would become theoreticians, not any intellectuals, not the university professors, but the people who had studied and understood Marxist theory to Lenin's standards would become the shepherds into a Marxist society. And they were going to bring about the revolution, and they were going to lead the proletariat and the peasants into socialism and as a state of mind, and into socialism as a social and economic order. And so Gramsci was looking at that and was like, no, because Lenin said it's the pinnacle of the intellectuals who should be leading the vanguard, who should be leading the revolution. And Gramsci had a different idea. He figured that would never work in the West in particular, that they would never be able to overcome the already intellectual kind of the existing intellectual infrastructure of society. People would just reject all this as kind of high-minded theory. And so what he said was you needed instead was some different approach that kind of bubbled up from the bottom. And he called these people organic intellectuals. Mm-hmm. So you would have members of the working party or of the working class who were coming to understand their experience, their lived experience, we would call it now, as a proletarian, to be one in which there is a system of oppression and so on. In other words, one in which class consciousness best explains their experience as a worker. And so these people he viewed as having more credibility with the other workers, but they also, because they were speaking from something that was lived experience, had kind of an epistemological leg up. They had a position, what they would call an intersectionality now, a positionality on the circumstances of society that people outside of that position wouldn't be able to refute. And so, in other words, the worker could talk about his experience of exploitation and alienation, and the bosses, the management could come back and say, "Shut up and do your job," or whatever. That's not what's going on, and or you're agitating, or whatever they wanted to say. And then the organic intellectual would be able to reply, "You don't understand what it's like to be us," and get a movement of solidarity where not only do they have a Marxist interpretation of what's going on that they're now putting into practice in the environment, the workplace environment, but also they have a kind of, I guess, epistemological trump card, which is you don't get it, that they can always throw down on the oppressor class. And so Gramsci was pushing hard for the organic intellectual to kind of be the way that Western Marxism would be organized and led. And we're fast forwarding across almost a century of development of these schools of thought. But at the far end of this is where we get Kincheloh's idea that of critical constructivism. Critical constructivism enables the "it's my lived experience" argument from any position of oppression to be able to become a trump card epistemologically that can override, what the work of genuine intellectuals who are doing, sound reasoning or rationality, or more importantly, good empirical work. Which is why good empirical work becomes irrelevant. It's not that it's not that we don't need it. It's not that it doesn't help in some sense to say, well, this is what the data really show. And I know a lot of these really smart social science guys with the kind of trans and gender stuff, a lot of really smart biologists and biology people who can just lay out all of the facts and make a very compelling explanation of our knowledge about physical reality. And nobody cares. The activists don't care. And then the people who know the facts, who learn them from these experts, turn around and find that the activists still don't care, when no matter how many people present them, no matter what the deal is. And the activists are able to be more persuasive with the people in positions of power because they're able to tap into that sense of lived experience and saying, well, frankly, they can say whatever they want, but they don't know what it's like to be me. And if you leave me out, I'm being discriminated against, or I'm being done wrong in some way or another. And so Gramsci kind of had it right for how to tap into Western civilization, but it took him a century to figure out how to make it work. The organic intellectual doesn't come into play until you have this critical constructivist epistemology that enables people to justify that so-called lived experience is in fact to be treated as a superior epistemology.
You can't have your revolution. You can't liberate knowledge with a reasonable argument or an appeal from authority, right? That's just not the way it's going to work. I tend to think, that I see a lot of the people in the universities, because I'm around it. The distance from campus and my time off campus is proportional with my level of sanity or wisdom or whatever you want to call it. But I see it as like completely like you know, it seems like you're looking at this for sort of reasons and rational arguments and like the corpus and like how is this, why is this? But to me, it's just this huge, just sort of impotent, sort of like indolent, you know, bureaucracy that these people like that you know, they would lose their silly, you know, professorships and if any of this was proven, you know, if they were to listen to, I don't know who exactly you're talking about, people like Deborah So or like whoever is making actual, you know, actual arguments. But to me, the sort of this like liberation is just completely toothless. Like it's just this like conformity, you know, it's just like parroting these tired, worn out arguments that these kids have been handed, unquestioningly, and you know, they get them young, and then you get these grad students who, you know, haven't read anything outside of what they've been handed, and they don't know anything really except, you know, how to read gender into text and how to sort of parrot post-structural jargon, and so yeah, I mean these kind of and you know, they're in a sense, you know, they're the useful idiots.
I think that you're astute here. This is a revolution of the mediocre. I think that's generally always the case, kind of with Marxists, except that in the cases of people like Lenin and Stalin and Mao, you actually had bloodthirsty tyrants who wanted to rule a country, and I mean rule a country. There are strong reasons to believe that Mao Zedong actually wanted to bring communism into the world, and maybe that he believed that it would work. But certainly, he was a narcissist. It was supposed to be all about his own power and adulation. Lenin was absolutely ruthless. And here, so you have all the mediocrity. That's who communist theory or Marxist theory in general inspires. That it tells the mediocre that it's not the fact that you're mediocre and doing mediocre work and focusing on the wrong things that are the explanation for your lack of success. It's instead that other people are holding you down, and we can basically incorporate hatred for those people and get revenge on them. But so what happens then is the only way this can operate is by creating a vast bureaucracy that punishes expertise and competence so that the mediocre can maintain their position of power. And in fact, all government, all even corporate entities are by their nature bureaucratic to a degree. Once you get to a certain size in employees with in a public company even, or even any company, once you have a certain number of employees, you need managers just to manage people. And at some point you need managers to manage managers, and you end up with a bureaucratic structure. Well, imagine that your whole society is built off of upholding an illegitimate party and a raft of lies that justify their reasons for being in power, in a way that, you know, ultimately is just lifting up two kinds of people, which I said are the mediocre and then grifters. What you're going to end up with is a sprawling bureaucracy filled with people who don't know how to do anything else. And it gets worse when you smash the profit motive. People can't go work for themselves. So the only meaningful employment you can get, and you actually see this in states here in the US where, you know, there's not a lot going on. The only meaningful employment in a lot of places is the government. You can't get a job. You can't go kind of create a job. Economic opportunity is not kind of real yet in an advanced sense. And so all you have is this kind of sprawling bureaucratic mess that's designed to uphold mediocrity. But upholding mediocrity in practice means what Lenin said was the point of the dictatorship of the proletariat, which was smashing your class enemies, which was, in other words, smashing experts, smashing expertise, so that the mediocre can stay on top. And you're absolutely right that what you deal with on a day-to-day basis with these wokers, these very mediocre minds who are not thinking deeply, they're not interacting with reality. You have to have almost this level of cushion between yourself and reality, whether it's wealth, whether it's growing up
Yeah.
in a wealthy home, something to not understand what's really happening around you and to not have to.
Never having left the academy.
Yeah, and then they just memorize, frankly, idiotic stuff that justifies the perpetuation of this whole raft of nonsense. And like you said, it becomes filled with people whose basic primary function, day in and day out, is to keep the whole thing going so that they don't lose their ultimately bogus jobs that not only should they not have, but they shouldn't exist in the first place.
Right.
And
yeah, that's what you see here. I mean, it's like I feel like the people that truly want some kind of like it's all just kabuki, you know. And you get like here these sort of bald-headed, you know, feminist geographers with tenure who, you know, you don't. It's just like this big hollowed out, you know, these hollowed out wings of the buildings, you know, of the departments. Or there's just
my
like
two favorite words lately are kabuki and Potemkin. Yeah, it's just pretend. It's all pretend work.
It's very sad.
There was this kind of funny. It's kind of dumb, but it's kind of funny. Somebody made a music video that put lyrics to the Tetris theme, which the name of the Tetris theme is something like Kornaniki or something like that. It's an old Russian folk song. It's called The Peddlers. That's what it translates to anyway. It's about two peddlers arguing. But they took the Tetris theme and they put lyrics to it that are not the traditional lyrics, but are rather supposed to be a history of the Soviet Union. You can dig this up. It's 10, 15 years old on YouTube. And one of the lines, I think about it actually a lot, is pointless work for pointless pay. Because it's, you know, talking about how we're the guys who arrange the blocks as they come down from up above because it's Tetris, right? But the whole kind of point they keep reiterating is we do pointless work for pointless pay. It's a Potemkin economy. And when we look at China, today, of course, they're rising and could threaten to become a superpower, or maybe they are a superpower at this point or close to it. They're not the superpower, but they're rising. They've done this through what ostensibly is the opening up of a market, but it's not a real market. It's a Potemkin market. It's a pretend market. If the government owns all the land, the government owns all the raw materials, the government owns the heavy capital, and you're allowed to make money within that, but you can't offend the government in any way, or they can strip you of the fundamental things you would need to be able to do that. And the entire market has to operate to the glory and the success of the CCP and its People's Republic of China as they see that it should be ruled and organized. So it's not even a real market. And that's why they're able to set up this great, you know, they call it the Great Chinese Firewall, where businesses have to do whatever they say if they want to be able to sell or even buy manufacturing from China at scale. And they can kind of leverage around the world to engineer a rise of the People's Republic state. But it's not real. It's not a capitalist economy. It doesn't work as a capitalist economy. And in fact, it wouldn't work at all if we were to pull the plug and make it so that the vast majority of the Western world wasn't subsidizing it by allowing it to be their primary manufacturer. Unfortunately, they've also spent the last 40 years engineering the circumstance to where we don't have an exit ramp from that. But Potemkin, kabuki, you know, pastiche, that's another word I use a lot when I talk about this stuff. It's everything is performative. Everything is in pastiche. Look at the Harris campaign. Every single thing was vibes, and the vibes were fake. The vibes were just manufactured media blitzes that didn't have anything behind them. Right.
All I see is Minneapolis burning with like the cackling and the goofy wall stuff. So that's my reaction to, you know, watching these clips. It's just, how is this so fake?
Yeah. Is that what it's like on campus at Berkeley? Is everything super fake?
I mean, there's a script. There is a very specific script. And look, I'm the personality type that, you know, I push up against authority. And I'm older than most of the student population here, but you don't go off script. And the truth is, and it's part of my sort of ethical injunction for doing this project, is that it's harder for kids here if you're conservative, and it really is. And I've been you know, if you you're not allowed to say what you really think. Obviously, you can very carefully and very quietly, sometimes in private corners of the academy, but I feel like most of my program was just like a lot of checking boxes. There's a lot of busy work. As the first thing that I noticed here is 80%. Like, they keep you so busy to the point where it's even hard to form an original thought. And I feel like you're at a disservice if you've done outside reading or if you've had any sort of life experience. It's really very, again, box checky. And I came into this before I got to Berkeley. I had this idea that philosophy was, ultimately to help people, and that our method, was pursuing objective truth, ultimately towards an ethical end. But what I found at Berkeley really, and I did a lot of work prior to coming here, and what I here, it was news to me that there's not there's not been objective truth has not been de rigueur for quite a long time, and so.
Where it cracks me up is at Harvard, where they literally have Veritas carved into stone on the walls.
Right.
And
and this is,
Veritas is not something that Harvard is interested in, and it has not been interested in Veritas for a while. I can't imagine, honestly, what it would be like to go to a school like Berkeley. That it has a script that you described is something I kind of anticipated I would hear. But it's still kind of shocking to hear it, if that makes any sense. So how severe is it in the Berkeley environment if you're off script? And you said that if you have done outside reading or life experience, that's actually not to your advantage. Is that because that would, be a direction in which you'd end up off script, and then whatever, punishments come your way as a result of that?
Yeah, by the way, here, it's not Veritas, it's Fiat Lux, right? So we got Fiat Lux on Sattergate. We got Fiat Lux at the base of the Campanile, which is, has a similar genealogy as something like Veritas does. And I wonder, where that is. I'm inconclusive on Fiat Lux here. If there is any, it's obviously from Genesis, from Exodus, and then, the light of objective truth. And if it's still here, I'm not sure. But your question was, one more time, sorry.
Oh yeah, I'm just wondering, you go off script. And you said it's not really to your advantage. Yeah.
So, for example, at the beginning of your first day of class, they ask the class to declare your gender pronouns. And I had someone thank me. Another student thanked me when my answer. I'm the only person I've ever heard do this. Is I actually disagree with queer theory and compelled speech, and awkward silence, and and I understand the gravity of saying this, but I do think that subtextually doing things like that works to your disadvantage. And what I mean is, all these little mercenary kids here, they want their good grades, and they want their their recommendation letters. And if that's, the cash value of your education, then being a square peg and speaking your mind is going to hurt that. It's going to, you're going to, the professor's not going to like you, and I think it will affect your transcript. And it's something that I was fighting, because you work so hard. I can't tell you how hard they work you here. It's like over the summer there was like 50. I did this really intensive workshop, which was like 50 hours a week plus at times, and but I do think speaking your mind in that way can it does have an actual effect on your transcript.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. You're being awfully polite, and I think, but what you're describing is the environment of a cult. That's the way that cults operate. There's reasons to believe that whatever the cult is offering, usually it's inclusion, not ironically. Usually it's inclusion into the cult environment and full status within it. But you purchase that by doing the rituals and saying the incantations and going along with the cult beliefs and doctrine at all times. And if you step out of line, then you're made to feel it. And it feels very much like that's what is replacing education, at least in your description, as somebody who steps outside of that, at least from time to time. And I would hate to say this under circumstances that aren't what they are, but the fact is that's exactly what woke is. That's exactly what this left-wing philosophy produces. This is, again, if we go back to Cynical Theories, and I had it to rewrite, you can read in my more recent books, I do describe this quite explicitly as a cult organization, a cult philosophy. But as far as you're talking about, transcripts and the the recommendation letters and so on being the kind of cash value of your education, so to speak. I don't know if it's a real education at Berkeley, or your traded time, it sounds like, at Berkeley, and your willingness to display fealty. When you talk about that, it seems as though, like you said, the entire purpose of an education itself has been hollowed out and replaced by this kind of, again, empty credentialism, where the most mediocre and obedient and maybe craven are able to rise to the top of the pile. And that seems pretty, soul stripping.
Okay. Well, I don't want to mischaracterize it here, because what I often say is about Berkeley is that it has its moments. Okay. And so, I don't know exactly what it's like on other campuses, but I can make, I think, educated guesses as to other, competitive and top programs being basically the same. But yeah, I will. I think that the extreme skepticism, to a ridiculous amount, is ubiquitous, because because at any given moment you have to entertain someone who doesn't believe that there's two genders, or et cetera. These sort of things that would seem so absurdly skeptical. And so everyone has to maintain an extremely skeptical viewpoint, and but let me do my best sort of interview moderation here, and I want to say that, to take it back to Cynical Theories, that I think because my sort of intellectual sort of progress or whatever started in New Atheism also. And so I think there was and I wanted to read something to you that I had read, probably I don't know, more than 5 years ago. And I thought it was, it kind of, I'm still coming to terms with my disappointment in Berkeley, but it really hit, 'cause I read it again and I had it, and you'll probably recognize it here. Okay. Cultural studies and science studies barons are not harmless eccentrics at third-rate state colleges. Many of them have tenured professorships at some of America's best universities. Men of this kind sit on appointment committees, wielding power over young academics who might secretly aspire to an honest academic career in literary studies or, say, anthropology. I know, because many of them have told me, that there are sincere scholars out there who would speak out if they dared, but who are intimidated into silence. To them, Alan Sokal will appear as a hero. So that's from, I don't know if you recognize it, very well-known paper by Dawkins, his review of Alan Sokal.
Yeah. Well, Alan's a wonderful man. I had the pleasure to get to know Alan a little bit over the last couple of years. This is, I think it really touches on something very, very clear. I've heard this from campuses across the country, not just, a sentiment that would be, issued at Berkeley or whatever. I've heard this at campuses across the country that, for example, especially in schools of education, I've heard, I have to go to school, and also in schools of law, which should scare the crap out of people, but I have to go to school and I have to memorize and recite the pablum, the right answers, the things that I know the professor wants, so that I can pass my class and get through my class with a, reasonable amount of, lack of discomfort, I guess, or just ease. And then on the other hand, I go home afterwards, and this speaks maybe to why you're kept so busy at Berkeley, and that seems to be an important thing. And in my spare time, I have to actually study education or study law. I have to think from the outside, and it's almost like I have to do one educational program that I'm led through by the university in order to get the credential. And then I have to live this double life where I actually, in my moonlight hours, go and study my actual subject so that I have a chance of being a competent professional in that field after I graduate. And that this is this weird, I've heard this from dozens of people, primarily in education and law, but also in the social sciences. There are a few departments where I've heard some decently good stories about in the social sciences where, you have a handful of professors who, are kind of a refuge for people who want to do actual research or heterodox research. But at one place, I've actually served as the one of, not the advisor, but one of the faculty team, the advisory team for a young man finishing his PhD. And it made sense in psychology. And it made sense because it was about the grievance studies affair. So you touch on Alan Sokal, that's similar to the grievance studies affair. So it was actually studying something to do with the grievance studies affair and what personality traits indicate likelihood to believe the kinds of things that we would have written in our hoax papers.
Okay.
And it was an interesting project. So I ended up being one of the faculty advisors for this doctorate. And another one of the reasons, besides that it's relevant for me to be there and getting special permission to have somebody outside the university be one of the, professors on the advisory committee, was because you have to have your main advisor and then 3 secondary advisors. Of course, I was one of the secondary advisors. And there were only 2. They couldn't find a third person to fill out that 4-person advisory committee.
It's plutonium.
Yeah. So this is, I would imagine that Berkeley is, if we look at this on a scale, that Berkeley is likely to be worse than most places. But this is happening even in, established state universities, across the country. And so Dawkins is absolutely tapping straight into something there. There are kids who I meet them myself at Turning Point, at USA events and so on. YAF events, college Republican events. There are kids who are hungry to get an education, hungry to become professionals, hungry to actually learn something.
Yeah.
Instead of doing this effectively, what you're describing is, and I get it, we don't want to overstate the case, but this performative Potemkin or Kabuki education that makes the frankly, there's a lack of a better word, captured or I guess captured is a good word, faculty happy. Mm-hmm. Ideologically possessed is my favorite way to describe it. And if I'm feeling a little bit, if I'm talking about children and in the transgender medicine domain, I usually use the phrase ideologically contaminated.
Right. Yeah, I've heard you say that.
Yeah, possessed has this like demonology kind of attached to it. Contaminated's got its own set of connotations, but both actually fit. But it seems like in this case that the professors, and not, I would say all of them, but a fair number of them are kind of like the people that walk around in hazmat suits and make sure that the contamination, I'm picturing those people in China. They went around during COVID and sprayed everything with like peroxide, wearing like the little space suits or whatever they're spraying. God only knows, being in China, what they would have been spraying. But I'm thinking about that. But it's like the professors or the people in the spacesuits spraying ideology onto people. And, if you open up your mouth and say, yeah, but did you look at the crime stats from actually, how many black people were murdered by police? And then you're like, shh, spray you right in the face. Like, calm down, Cameron. Shh. You don't say that here. This is Berkeley. But I hear that a lot, this kind of dual life of the students who are hungry to learn. And it frustrates me that this is why, the subtitle of one of my books was The Theft of Education. Well, it was blah, 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 and the theft of education. But this is what's happened.
That was the one about Ferry?
Yeah, that's about Freddie. But the people in your cohort of, college students and grad students have had their higher education stolen from them by these crackpot professors who never should have been able to rise to this position that Dawkins, describes of wielding immense power over the circumstances of these students who actually want to learn something.
Mm-hmm. I got another one here, actually. Okay. Lacan, Derrida, and Foucault poured like ketchup over everything. Lacan, the French fog machine, a gray flannel worrybone for toothless academic pups, a twerpy, cape-twirling Dracula dragging his flocking stooges to the crypt. Lacan is a Freud t-shirt shrunk down to the teeny-weeny Saussure torso. The entire school of Saussure, including Lévi-Strauss, write the muffled prose of people with cotton wool wrapped around their heads. They're like walking Q-tips. Derrida, a gloomy Gus one-trick pony, stuck on rhetorical trope, already available in the varied armory of new criticism. Derrida's method, masturbation without pleasure. It's a bird brain game for bird seed steaks. New Foucaultian new historicism, a high wax bowling alley where you score points just by knocking the pins down. Hey fellas, there's something out there that electrocutes people on beaches, collapses buildings like cardboard, and drowns ships and villages. It's called nature. The next time the western horizon flames with crimson, remember that this is what Foucault never saw.
Yeah, that's about right. This is postmodernism was frankly the fruit of a discontented class within a highly decadent society, like the remark says. And I don't know who said that one, but was it Dawkins too?
That is Polya.
Okay. Yeah. She's pretty good. So they didn't interact with reality. They interacted in this kind of universe of ideas where none of the ideas really matter. It reminds me of that show that Drew Carey used to be on, that Whose Line Is It Anyway show, where all the points are made up and they don't matter anyway or whatever. Yeah. And that's literally the way that they all kind of play their game. They're not interacting with reality, and they can only do that in a space that is carved out for them to be safely ensconced from nature. Nature that can crumple buildings like cardboard, you have to be protected from that. You have to be well fed. You have to be, watered and cleaned in order to be able to avoid the ravages of reality. And there, you can play around with these ideas. But the irony is that, postmodernism wasn't even popular in France. That they didn't particularly care for it. The French even thought it was a bit pompous, a bit ridiculous, and may not actually say anything or mean anything. The reason that we have to deal with postmodernism at all, and I mean that, at all, is very simple. Is because the feminists here in the United States and in Canada and somewhat in Britain saw it as an opportunity to tear apart the concept of gender, which they had more or less recently invented or adopted to mean something different than one's sex, somehow ethereal to sex, but I define it frequently as gender is what is meant by sex without sex. And there's no pun on the word sex here. I mean, biological, substrate without the biological substrate, essentialism with no essentialism. And so they wanted to tear that apart. They wanted to deconstruct it. They wanted to liberate themselves from the concept of sex and gender roles so desperately that they imported this, toxic brew of French goofball philosophy that doesn't really achieve much except sounding smart and being complicated. It has a handful of interesting ideas, I suppose, badly expressed and poorly applied, but they imported it for a purpose. They misinterpreted it and misappropriated it, as a matter of fact, in order to achieve that purpose. And now we're all saddled with this crap. At least the critical theorists. So you talk about, the quote, and Paglia talks about, the sun flaring crimson on the horizon. Well, at least like Herbert Marcuse, and he was out there, in California. He looked out at the sunset out over the Pacific and just was mad that it was beautiful. Like, he believed in it. He was just upset that it was nice. He didn't want things to be good. Everything had to be miserable somehow. Look at all these effing happy Californians when they don't even know that they're being exploited and could have a utopia. And so it's, I don't know which one of those dispositions is worse, but the fact is that largely thanks to the feminists, but not entirely, the two of them mated and have taken over the way that our institutions of higher education think, how they teach, and what they demand students to at least pretend they believe in, so that they can get their transcripts and their recommendation letters.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to, really. It's very mercenary. I mean, I'm a little bit older than the other kids here, and that's really what it boils down to. And in competitive programs like this, these kids are here with war paint on their face, ready to decapitate each other for that spot at, you name it, the competitive clerkship at the, after they get their JD or what have you. And so there is the right answers are rewarded, and going off script is just, they don't know what to do with you, really. But I will say, what I found here is that people I want to be careful, but people like Sally Haslinger, or these these really dialectic, critical theory scholars, I feel like there's maybe one or two token of them around, and it's really just this skepticism that is pervasive. And so, like you say, that they married them together, and you even pointed out that part of this was Kimberly Crenshaw, right, who was responsible for this sort of fusion of these underlying. I mean, the way I see it, part of what philosophy does, and they say this, is to teach you how to think metaphysically. And so I see the main moves, like the skepticism, the anti-realism, the dialectics, the realism. And so, who combined these, Crenshaw and, but yeah, here I really think social constructivism is the going, that's what we're going with. And, if you're, it's really just, there aren't any vulgar Marxists, or anything like that.
Yeah, Marcuse in the 60s called these people communists of strict obedience. And that's kind of a good term. And it's, of course, versatile because, there's not really any critical theory. There are some. There aren't many critical theorists of strict obedience. There aren't many communists or Marxists of strict obedience. But what you have now is this new, to use Jordan Peterson's term, postmodern neo-Marxism, or to use Joe Kinchelo's fusion
I think
term,
he's
this critical constructivism.
Mm-hmm. He's a psychologist. Peterson. He's a psychologist, but he tries to do philosophy. I think whenever he makes a point, it's like, okay, that's a psychologist's point. But I think he's accurate.
Was titled Maps of Meaning, so he was definitely digging into, meaning structures and teleology and other kind of high philosophy zones in order to write that.
My point being that I think he's accurate. That when he says that.
Yeah, he was absolutely accurate in that characterization. And if you don't play in that world now, this constructivist world with a critical theory veneer attached to it, if you don't play in that world now within the elite spheres or within these institutional environments, you really, it's not that you don't have a place, but it's not because you're wrong. It's because there's a consensus against allowing you to be heard. And the irony of this, and it's sort of one of my favorite, most delicious ironies ever, is that the postmodernists, or some of them at least, Jean-Francois Lyotard was extremely clear on this, which is uncharacteristic of Jean-Francois Lyotard, but he was extraordinarily clear on this concept that he referred to by the phrase legitimation by parology, which is a big fancy dumb shit way to say believing things because of consensus, social enforcement. And so if you don't play in the paralogical structure that they've come up with, the name of the game is exclusion. And again, so circling back to where we started, if I had to describe all of this back in 2020, again, I would love to describe the kind of unreality that characters in history like Mao Zedong or Lenin or Stalin created around their cult, their Marxist cult or Marxist-Leninist cults, and that they forced people to play in. A common belief in that the government pushed relentlessly that everybody had to participate in so much the same way that what you're describing in these elite universities, especially if you wanted to get anywhere, like, to lunch, to get to have lunch today. But was one of the main ideas was 3 years of hard work and then then we'll have it, or 3 more years of hard work and then we'll have communism. And it was one of these deals where, you can imagine yourself buckling down and building a better world. And yeah, we've got to get all of this industry. We got to get all these dams and all these irrigation canals built in order for it to work. So that'll take about 3 years. And these people believed it. They believed. But at the same time, whether they believed or not, it didn't matter, because if you didn't participate, you didn't get your ration for that week. And you probably, based on where you were nutritionally and where your work requirements were, you would probably starve to death in those 7 days. And that was the primary weapon. A lot of people, Mao famously said, power flows from the barrel of a gun. The majority of the power in his regime flowed from the withholding of canteen coupons. They literally would weaponize your access to food. So if you wanted to, it's not about a transcript anymore. It's not about a recommendation letter. It's not about that spot in the coveted internship. It's, are you going to get to eat this week? Or is your family going to get to eat this week? And you either toe the line or the answer is no. But he created this, it's been described by the psychologist Robert Lifton as a cult of enthusiasm. Through this, there was this enthusiasm that these people got so worked up in it that they were going to create the communism. But it was all a farce. And of course, what happened was the Great Leap Forward, and somewhere between 45 and 55 million people died, primarily of starvation and exposure, between 1960 and the end of 1961, or end of the winter of 1962 or so. Absolutely brutal failure. And this is cushier and has a lot more money behind it, and we're not building irrigation ditches and dams that don't work and reservoirs that don't serve the area that they're supposed to serve them and end up drying up. We're not doing any of that kind of
Lysenko
stuff. Yeah, but we're creating a professional class that creates the bureaucracy that sets the stage to create that environment in 5 to 10 years. And what you're describing is at these elite universities is young people competing to be the little bastard that's going to sit in that spot.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it takes to wake these people up, because there's an old saying, it's not that old, I guess, but so Warren Buffett's investing partner, and this isn't, a quote can be taken out of the context of the person who said it. So if you don't like Warren Buffett, or you don't, because some people will listen to this and be like, oh, they just quoted a big finance guy, blah, 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 wealthy, it doesn't matter. It could have been said by anybody. It could be said by literally anyone, and it's a very cynical quote. Like he said, so Charlie Munger, who was Warren Buffett's partner in investment till he died, said, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. Very, very simple. So what you're describing to me, I've thought it 20 times in this conversation already. What you're describing to me is that there's an incentive structure being built out at competitive elite universities. And that incentive structure incentivizes the creation of a zombie, mediocre, idiot bureaucracy that exists only to increase and perpetuate itself and to stamp out anything that might compete with it by dint of actually knowing what it's doing, for example. And you can see what the outcome will be. The outcome will be a big, sprawling zombie bureaucracy that's based off of idiotic beliefs that elevates grifters and mediocre players who are most interested in maintaining their grift and their government job, and nothing ever successfully getting done, partly because nobody wants to do it and partly because nobody knows how to do it, even if they wanted to. And then you start to step into the kind of territory that we saw with the Great Leap Forward.
What would that?
I don't mean to be so grim.
No.
What's going on with this is dark. I mean, what's actually happening at schools, I'm sure a lot of the people there are very happy to be there, and they're like in the prime of their life and all this, or they think they are. Actually, it's later, but they think they're in the prime of their youth and their life, and the world's out all open in front of them. But the fact is, they're in this weird, very, very dark situation that's
Do you mean that, like, when the systems start to fail, then at some point someone's going to hand the reins over, and that's when this sort of great, it's like, what does that transition look like in the way you just described it?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a number of different things that'll happen. One is this kind of death of institutional knowledge. So you start replacing people with kind of all these like worthless hires that make your work life awful. We already saw this with COVID, right? So a lot of people, not least because of the forced shots that they didn't want to get necessarily, or even if they didn't care whether they got it or not, they didn't want to be forced. So you had a lot of people, 50 plus, decided to just go ahead and retire. So you have all of these kind of like seasoned experts who don't just have an education, but also have decades of work experience in a field, let's say it's petroleum engineering or something like that, or building nuclear power plants or something like that. And all of a sudden, and I'm hearing about this from, all right, here's a great example of where this is real. Everybody knows it's a crisis with Boeing. Everybody wants to blame DEI. It's mostly not DEI. It's mostly that all of the competent mechanics and machinists who used to build the freaking aircrafts themselves retired.
Yeah.
And so you don't have people who know how to do it.
Yeah, we couldn't
do it, and they're not there to mentor people to do it.
I understand.
And
so like
even if we wanted to, we couldn't build a Saturn V rocket to go to the moon, right?
Elon Musk could with his engineers, but
the same idea.
Yeah, and so except in these pods of people pursuing excellence, you will not find that. Boeing can't even build like kind of basic stuff now that
Right.
that's its signatures, and it's pulling completely out of its foray into space exploration. It was building, very famously for the last year, created a space capsule that failed and nearly, was stranded and maybe nearly killed those 2 astronauts. And they're just like, well, we're out of space. Imagine this, on a even greater scale, where, for whatever reason, we need to build, let's say, not just even next generation, but just new nuclear power plants to be able to, I guess we're building nuclear power plants now, not to power America, but rather to power data centers, which are, basically to run the digital gulag. The problem is in some of these other countries that have gone into denuclearization of their power grid, they don't have people who know how to build nuclear reactors anymore. This loss of institutional knowledge is actually a crisis.
No, I know. That's what I was going to say, is that this idea is related to what they call the replication crisis. And, to back up a little bit, you said cult of enthusiasm. That was what it was, right?
Yeah, cult of
and
enthusiasm.
And so if you like etymological arguments, the word enthusiasm means, it goes towards your religion argument, because enthusiasm is you're possessed by God, right? If you're enthusiastic, you have God in you.
That fits. And Mao said to not have the correct political orientation is like not having a soul. So it fits exactly. Mm. So you have the correct political orientation, and now you're enthusiastic as a result of that. In other words, you've been, in a sense, ensouled as a result of having adopted the correct political orientation. And you can see this with this kind of woke stuff where people adopt it and become really excited that now they're going to transform the world. They're going to make racism go away. They're going to, transform the circumstance for young, I guess, homosexuals that are children that don't have representation for themselves, whatever it happens to be. Never build a rocket and never figure out how, do important like permafrost engineering in order to make sure that you can build something where people actually live, where there's, freezing temperatures, and, you don't want them to die, or you don't want their dock to sink into the glacial silt and destroy itself and other things and kill people. You don't see people getting enthused about that. You see people getting enthused about, taking up goofy social activist causes that don't even seem to, they might have whatever intentions. I'm not going to judge people for their intentions. Some people do bad things on purpose, but a lot of people don't mean to. But they get very enthused to do things that are not particularly useful. And so, again, you have this kind of looming crisis of competence coming in a society based off of the incentive structure we were talking about that incentivizes them to please these, phonies that they call professor, so that they can get a nice letter of recommendation to get into some institutional horseshit job that doesn't actually do what it needs to do. It's frankly, the irony is that it's extraordinarily bourgeois. I mean, it's like when the kids say that's bougie as hell, this is what they're talking about. The whole thing is bougie as could be.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the and so the dialectic progresses point where I think it's like Chomsky it's nearly a banal point, which is by saying that everything's manifestation of power through language or whatever. Clearly, you're going to end up looking like somebody who thinks that and is and even is more of a tyrant than the people you're accusing of being a tyrant. And so, it's, but the thing that this kind of points to, that I was thinking, I was listening to your What is Cultural Marxism episode, and I was thinking like a lot of, it goes to this replication crisis point, which is like that, in a lot of like the 20th century domains, like you see this in psychology. Like if you take a Psych 1 class, you'll see all of these, like the original like social psychology experiments. A lot of them were in reaction to like the 20th century atrocities, like namely the Holocaust. And And that this led to, right, this just sort of acceptance of these psychological arguments as being, sound. And then we started to figure out that, actually they can't be replicated. And a lot of critical theory, had the same impetus, which was, the Enlightenment led to the extermination of 6 million Jews, and that maybe this sort of runaway train, that we're on now, is like subject to the same sort of problems where, there was an ethical component that made these arguments worth making at the time, but we need to reassess things and maybe pivot away from what our inability to innovate and whatever it might be.
Well, yeah, I mean these are ultimately extraordinarily regressive, reactionary movements. I keep characterizing on social media that if you don't understand that Marxism was a return movement in the sense that contemporary slang, that it's allegedly the reactionaries on the right, the traditional Catholics who always say return, right? Return, and they spell it with a V instead of a U, return. But Marxism itself was a return movement. The critical theory impetus was a return movement. It was all along that the movement forward through industrialization and technological advancement and into an advanced economy was actually all bad, and we should go back. We should go back to a different mode. The goal of communism is to return to a tribal environment. The goal for Rousseau before the communists, who laid a lot of the philosophical underpinnings, was to return to state of nature. What does it mean to be a free human in his state of nature? He romanticized this, what he called the savages. He studied, but he, at the same time, not wrongly, wanted to keep the benefits of civilization. So the dialectical aspect in the social environment became, how do we get back to our state of nature while maintaining the fruits of civilization? How do we have what Rousseau literally called savages made to inhabit cities? So we'll be free again when we live like the savages, but we don't want to live in, grass huts. And so since we don't want to live in grass huts and eat coconuts, we want to have, nice music, and we want to have nice buildings, and we want to have, opera and all of this stuff. How do we get the best of both worlds? And that was the answer is you don't. They are fundamentally different modes of existence that require different things. And so Marx picked this up and wanted to have a return movement to when we were all far more social, like in the tribe. So how do we have tribal communism, but for the whole planet, while we also get to retain all of the advanced economic and cultural benefit that came along with capitalism? He's very clear that that's the whole point. And his answer was, capitalism came up with the means of production, so we'll just seize them. We'll just take the means of production and just keep producing. And as far as innovation goes, his answer was basically that you won't need to anymore. The society will innovate to the point where it no longer needs to innovate, and then we'll seize the means of production, and then we'll have a high enough level of production. In fact, we might have to scale it back. And the critical theorists believed the same thing. They believed, like you said, that all this enlightenment and so on, which, by the way, there's fast and loose with enlightenment. There were multiple enlightenments. There was not the enlightenment. There were several of them in different locations with philosophies, different metaphysical assumptions. A romantic enlightenment in France, an idealist enlightenment in Germany, a common sense enlightenment in Scotland, and somewhat in England. They're not commensurate philosophical movements. In fact, common sense realism from Scotland rejects all the rest of them completely. And that's why Hume and Rousseau had their fights, because common sense realism and French romantic idealism do not go together. So anyways, I
can tell you what I mean when I say vision.
Go ahead.
Right. Well, I was just going to say that when I say it, I mean something very specific. So I could elaborate.
Go
on
ahead
that.
if you want. But I mean, they don't like when Horkheimer and Adorno wrote Dialectic of Enlightenment, they were sloppy with what they meant by it.
Sure.
I'm not too worried about it. They mix all those things together so that they can, in fact, they are German idealists as it is, with certain romantic aspects that they adopted from their Rousseau, their Rousseauian underpinnings. So they took all of that and just
Freud.
blended it into the Scottish common sense realism so that they could destroy classical liberalism and liberty and impose their stupid idealistic vision, which is technically what you would call, if we were really serious about it, a negative idealism. They don't know what the ideals are. They just know that they know what the ideals aren't. And so they can complain. That's what critical theory is about. We don't know what the ideal is, but we know what it isn't. And we can complain about what's not ideal until we get closer to it. And ultimately, how is this supposed to produce a better situation, right? It's not supposed to continue to, I would say, progress, but it's not about progress. It's about solving problems. That's what innovation is. Human beings have problems, whether it's interacting with nature and their environment or interacting with one another, and we need solutions to those problems in order to not have the problem anymore. And they literally have this vision that everything gets better when we hit a point where people who didn't make the thing, who don't know how the thing works, takes control of its operation, and then stops innovating, stops driving forward. It's very, very sloppy and very cynical, really, which is why we call it cynical theories, obviously. They don't have a positive vision for making the world a better place. They actually just want to criticize the people who are making the world work out of their positions so that they can hold those positions themselves, even though they aren't qualified to be there, which, again, sounds kind of like what we're talking about our university experience in elite colleges.
Yeah. I wonder, well, often from the right, you hear this argument that's like, that tacks on some motivations that may or may not be there. Like, that their goal is to, maintain their sinecures of, and have their power. But like, I have a hard time. I have a hard time with that, because I think that, I think a lot of it is, and I won't say, is banal, but it's just like people, I don't know, it is cynical, but I always feel like, that the person who's slapping on the good guy badge, right, who now has moral impunity, is gonna do more damage than the skeptic in that sense. And so, like, and so I wonder, are they just, what is it? Are they just, yeah.
It's that they think that of course they think that they're doing what's best in the world according to their understanding of the world, but they have insulated themselves such that their understanding of the world can't be challenged. If you read Herbert Marcuse, his One-Dimensional Man, everybody who disagrees with him is just one-dimensional, while he's two-dimensional. Right? And so now he's just more advanced. He just understands things better.
Yeah.
Well, what he does with the second dimension, which is critical theory, is all explicitly a negative idealist argument. So he is appointing himself as better at understanding what's going wrong with society, and therefore he should be in this position of being able to tell people what's gone wrong. If you read the Critical Constructivist Primer by Joe Kinchelow, he's very, very clear.
I have not.
That outside of understanding a critical constructivist perspective, all you're engaging in is assertions of power that you don't realize are assertions of power. And so if you disagree with a critical constructivist for any reason, whether you disagree with them factually, whether you disagree with them logically, whether you disagree with them legally, when they try to apply their things in the world, all you're doing is applying power unjustly, and they alone have the capacity. Only a critical constructivist can understand how you're actually engaging in something, morally and intellectually deficient. And so what they create is, it's a superiority complex that's then works at the theory doesn't intend to, but what it creates around itself is a hermetically sealed environment where only people who think like they think already can possibly understand how they think. And so, unfortunately, people who challenge them are some combination of intellectually or morally or psychologically compromised.
Right.
So they can wear the good guy badge and the smarter than you badge and the more sane than you badge. So they can put on all those badges and say and believe that what they're doing is genuinely good.
Yeah.
I don't know that Herbert Marcuse did, but maybe he did. For some higher purpose, they're usually thinking about some greater good that they imagine in some sense, hence the idealism contained within it. And then they put these badges on, and then by virtue of having done so, again, hermetically seal their own environment from the ravages of anything that actually challenges their view. The only thing that's allowed in to challenge their view is a more critical perspective.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. So, like the advancement from feminist critiques of sex, or sex roles, I should say, to queer theory and trans critiques of sex itself. The only thing that can get through the filter is something that's even further critical, because you have to pay the critical tax to get in the door in the first place. Mm-hmm. So this is why their thinking is sometimes described as a ratchet that only turns in one way. You turn it and it clicks, so it can't spin backwards. It only continues to spin further and further and further to the left.
Okay, a couple things. One thing that I noticed, by the way, there are, it's a vast minority, but there are good professors here. There are good classes here. During one of these classes, I was reading outside, and I think that if you're talking about like this sort of social, like maybe like anthropological way that like critical theory works, or like a sort of dialectic metaphysic works, you end up as that ratchet continues to ratchet up, you end up with sort of this struggle sessions, and you might even say sacrifice of people to the cause. Like and what I was going to say is, like, I read a lot of Girard. I don't know if you are familiar with René Girard. During this really great class I took here by Professor Ferrari, who's a fantastic luminary in the classics department. And that the only thing that's allowed in, right, is more criticism. And where does that lead? Really, it leads to accusations and this very unchristian sort of anthropology where eventually someone needs to be the scapegoat, and you get struggle sessions, and someone like Girard would say ritual sacrifice, even in terms of, say, Plato or Jesus, and so it's I don't know, that just occurred to me as you were talking about it. And you see that here. I see it explicitly when they rip they dename the buildings. They rip these founding scholars' names because they're because obviously words are
harmful.
Words are very harmful. They are
very harmful.
Manifestations of power and things like that. And so it's really this kind of dialectic where you sacrifice the guy's name off the front of the building, and the community is cured for that amount of time with a common enemy.
Yeah, that's right. Girard has some pretty good analysis of these things. I find them at least fascinating, and that's, I think, correct in terms of where the impetus for the struggle session comes from. Like I said, when you understand that what you have in these ideologies is a very fragile worldview that has hermetically sealed itself, what's going to and has imbued itself with entitlement and superiority, what's going to happen when that worldview encounters, as it will not only inevitably do, but inevitably increasingly do as time goes on, especially as it concentrates, when it encounters something that threatens it. Well, all of a sudden there's a threat to the community, and the community can rally together. This hermetically sealed ideological community can come together, and like Gerard describes, it can scapegoat an outsider that's actually the cause of the threat, and then it can ritually purge the something that represents, or actually the threat itself. Whether that's a peeling of a name off of a building, which is a symbolic action, or whether that's defenestration in the professional sense, which is what we call cancel culture, or whether it's literally a struggle session where, like we see at the beginning of Three Body Problem, where somebody ends up getting beat to death on stage while being ritually humiliated in front of a crowd. And I think that that's an astute way to understand that phenomenon. But the source of it is the inherent weakness in a very thin and fragile, but very puffed up, hermetically sealed worldview that has threats to its capacity to believe itself being introduced. And of course, the whole community cohesion, look at woke people. There's, like you even described, you have these cutthroat sharks, students they would decapitate someone else. You said, I don't think you necessarily mean literally, but in some cases,
no, I don't.
Probably.
Very competitive.
But I understand what you mean by this very competitive, cutthroat, professional environment. And you have this is not a community that is held together by the attempt for mutual betterment, by pro-social means and norms. This is something very different. And what's holding it together is ideological lockstep, ideological conformity, in the sense of oppression by an outside force, or a sense of responding to that oppression, which grants the superiority points. And so, yes, absolutely yes.
Yeah.
The threats that reality and dissident thinkers and facts present to this have to somehow be ritually purged in order to create the psychosocial dynamic that can maintain a community under such conditions.
Yeah.
And what word do they focus on so much? Community. It's always the community. It's always about the community. It's, of course, a collectivist way of thinking, but it's always the community. You harmed the community by, having beliefs that disagree with us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's strange to me that people can earnestly use, these words, diversity, or, and you're good on this, and of course DEI, but they seep into like business jargon, and they seep into, I would say the entire, nearly the entire, every wing of the studies departments doesn't have a firm grasp on, and then just sort of parrot these things. But like, it's administration, right? It's just
bloat and bullshit. A lot of it has to do with consultants too. The consultant class is a group of people who do not get nearly the amount of blame for this mess in our society that they deserve. And the logic's pretty simple. What do management consultants actually sell? Okay, let's be very generous and just plain about it. They sell management advice, right? So they're going to go to Nike, and they're going to go to Coca-Cola and these other corporations. They're going to tell the executives how to better run their company in the present environment, right? These aren't marketing consultants. They're not trying to say, here's what the trends are specifically. They're management consultants. These people make $1 million and a half bucks a year to do whatever it is they do at Booz Allen Hamilton or Deloitte or Boston Consulting or whatever other crap. McKinsey, for God's sake, which is basically revolving over to the CIA. And so they what do they sell? How to run you're talking to Coca-Cola. What the hell are you doing, Deloitte? You're telling Coca-Cola how to manage itself better? The company's 130 years old. The company is one of the largest brands on the planet. You're telling them how to manage it better? So maybe you have some good advice. Let's be very charitable. You have some good advice and you go sell to Coca-Cola how to run their company a little bit better. And they say, hey, we saw a 0.75% increase in our returns thanks to you. Turns out that's a gigantic number, so it justifies paying you $4 million or whatever, because now we made like, $20 million off of our $4 million investment where everybody's happy. So now it's 3-4 years later, Deloitte wants another contract with Coke. What are they going to do? They can't go sell the same stuff, which is actually how to manage a company better. They can go in and look at what Coke is doing and play from the old movie Office Space, the Bobs, and so, well, you're a little bloated here and you could cut back. But that's all BS. What they do is they sell business fads. That's the snake oil. Here's the new hottest damn thing in business management. We're all going to be diversity consultants, and we're going to bring in all this new theory. Nobody knows it, and then but Deloitte knows it, and all their consultants they hire off to the side know it. And we're going to do this, and this is going to improve our HR environment. And then the administrative monster's like, oh, something interesting for us to do that's not just file paperwork and make sure people's payroll is taken care of and deal with employee complaints. We have a mission. And so there's this whole toxic environment where the administrations and corporations and institutions are looking for something interesting to do. And the consultants, if they have a real product in the first place, can only sell it once, but they have to justify new contracts. So they start selling fads. And these kinds of fads, the diversity grift, the ESG grift, the sustainability, this is all corporate nonsense that allows consultants to have important positions, and then for people that go to their meetings to become like little crusaders, and they get to hold seminars, and they get to have meetings out, in Germany or in Fiji or wherever it is they arrange their corporate meetings, and they get to do all their cool stuff. And it's like this whole like snowball of just, for lack of any better word, because it's the only word that fits, this whole snowball of horseshit. Corporate horseshit. It's like self-sustaining corporate horseshit. And these stupid theories from the humanities bleeding over into, business administration, business management departments, which skew conservative overall still, but bleeding over into that, it becomes like this idea field for, hey, look, here's the next great big corporate scam that we can go run for the next few years. And now that DEI and ESG are starting to hit the rocks with corporations, you can bet all the consultants within the next 12 to 24 months are going to come up with some other steaming pile of corporate BS, I guess, or shit, that they're going to go sell because they need to sell a product for $5 million or $20 million or whatever a hit to all these large corporations. The entire industry, and this, talk about people getting mad at me, the entire industry of corporate consulting is 90% bogus. There are lots of things that could be done. I know a guy who does a consulting job. His corporation is a consulting business, but what he does is he helps companies get between the 3-year and the 5-year mark. So it's up to a 2-year contract. And if you get over the 2 years, it's hard for companies to do a 5-year breakout. There's specific challenges from the 3 to 5 year mark. And he helps new companies. So there's new clients. He's not going back to the same client and trying to sell them some new garbage. He's getting one company after another, small businesses primarily, through the 3 to 5 year mark, which is okay, fine. People actually at that point need management consulting. That's when it applies. This isn't what Deloitte and McKinsey and Booz Allen and all these other people at Boston Consulting, it's not what they're doing. They're doing something fundamental, and we haven't even talked about EST Landmark, which is like a whole other level of this stuff.
Yeah. I don't know this.
We don't need to talk about them, but they're as bad as Scientology. They'll come after us.
Yeah, I was just.
But you're in the right neck of the woods for them, by the way. They have deep ties in your area.
What is it?
I mean, I guess isn't surprising. There's something wrong with that entire section of California ideologically.
It's Landmark. What? Sorry.
EST.
EST.
Yeah, Landmark EST. It's a consulting thing.
Yeah, as bad as Scientology, huh? Yeah, I was just talking to somebody the other day about how the Nation of Islam is like, allies with Scientology. I always thought that was a funny partnership.
I mean, I guess you got to make friends somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you give yourself permission to go a little into the weeds. Like I remember I listened to what WTF is SEL, and this is it gets a little. I like that I'm sure like your listeners are glad that you're able to do that. I really appreciate it. I don't know. That occurred to me while you were talking. But I don't know about this thing that you brought up, and I will look into it. One thing I wanted to bring to your attention is that a lot of this stuff, as it exists today, you can draw an analogy, or you can just think that like the way that it works is just the same, insofar as like our world today is just a blown up version of 2,500 years ago, which I'm beginning to think more and more is the case, is that a lot of these things, like a lot of these things that you see today, like postmodernism, right? Like you could make, a very close analogy to the sophists in the Greek Enlightenment, right? A lot of their basic principles are the same. A lot of the arguments, for and against it in Plato are the same. And of course, the other enemy of Plato, well, there were many, but the materialists, which I think they didn't get a single mention in any of the dialogues just because they were so maligned. And the Heraclitans, which are the critical theorists today. And so, it's like when you read some of these old dialogues, because I did a lot of ancient philosophy, I learned to read and write ancient Greek. He could exist today, saying this stuff, complaining about how the sophists secretly teach Heraclitus in the academy. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. Well, as it says, there's nothing new under the sun.
Nihil sub sole novum.
Yeah, right.
That's in Latin.
Yeah, that's Latin.
Sorry, go ahead.
But no, I mean, it's just these societies and humans. This is a generally, philosophically kind of very conservative thing to say, but society and humans don't actually change that much. And so the same kinds of tricks will arise at similar points in kind of political development of societies with the similar kinds of groups attempting to, work their way into status and prestige and power, depending on what it is that they're after. And so, nothing new under the sun in this regard.
Yeah. No, it's really true. I mean, it's I don't know if you noticed this, but I mean, there's a lot of this stuff in so many of the dialogues, especially when on the sort of more complaining tangents, like in Cratylus or anything else. I mean, any of the main sort of moves in Plato, like Callicles' speech. I mean, these are all arguments for against social constructivism generally. And, there was a concerted effort in the stuff we're contending with now, as far as back as you can trace it. I mean, 3 hours on Hegel. But Hegel said himself, right? There's no part of my logic that is not from Heraclitus.
Right? Yeah, right.
And you can, it seems like a lot of this stuff, a lot of it explicitly. And when I say Enlightenment, a lot of them, like Heidegger, for example, they're specifically saying, Kant, Descartes, these are the guys who we need to destroy. And in the 19th century, like these philologists, like Nietzsche, Marx, right, they knew what they were doing. And you can look at, say, Marx's dissertation, right, or in Heidegger, it's like, the concept of time. These early essays, right? Like sort of more clumsy attempts at the enterprise. There's one for Hegel. It's early essays, and they're less careful about the project, and it's it's in direct opposition to. And I'm saying this descriptively, right? I'm not saying this, oh, bad. I mean, they did their job. They did the job they were trained to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in opposition to Plato, to Judeo-Christian metaphysics. And it's not a big secret,
You're right. Yeah, no, they didn't keep it secret at all.
But it's fascinating to actually, look at that stuff firsthand. I mean, it's because you can follow the breadcrumbs back to antiquity, with a little effort.
Right.
So what do you say in the sort of Gnosticism and Hermeticism stuff that you look at? That these were explicitly heresies in the sort of church father era, like the first 4 centuries, like before sort of Plotinus picked up into Augustine, right? And so that these were they were a lot of this stuff that you can dig down, and they are explicit heresies, and we want to say we live in a religious tolerant sort of deist conception in this country and things like that, but we do lean back on Christian ethics, I think, to an extent, and it comes to bear with this stuff.
No, I think that's right, and that's why I think seeing this this kind of leftist move as being a form of what I variously call social Gnosticism or socio-Gnosticism or something to that effect, sociological Gnosticism sometimes. I think that's so incredibly important that we're not dealing with a kind of sociology that understands individuals are the atoms of society that then form whatever we want to talk about it in network theory, or they form families or whatever it is, units within in the social fabric. But instead, what we're now seeing it as is, well, there's an intrinsic way to think that there are certain classes in society that oppress other classes. And the oppression is virtually total. It's alienating of who you really are. It prevents you from enjoying the fruits of your life. Civilization itself becomes the alien in Rousseau, and in Marx, of course, it's put in the middle class, the bourgeoisie. And you have, if you don't understand this, therefore, as being a kind of not just attack, which is Marxism is a very direct attack on Jewish and Christian thought. But if you don't understand this as being a subversive attack on those as well, that's trying to reinterpret the social environment in a way that's very self-serving, then you really can't make sense of these people. And I think the key difference between the ancient Gnostics, who had their own little cults, which was, I think, about having a cult, frankly, various interpretations, secret hidden interpretations of what the scriptures really indicated. What you have differently from there to now is that when it's no longer a spiritual endeavor, it's now a social endeavor, you have something in a sense very concrete that you perceive that you can do about it, or you can convince people that you can do about it. And that inspires a lot of the political and social activism. And so what you end up having is, in nowhere, to my knowledge, there may have been some cults, but I don't know about them, in the first centuries or even in antiquity, in which they had this generally Gnostic structure of a all bad creation done by a demonic figure that has that knowledge that that's not God, but that there's that it's actually an evil force, and there is a God. Otherwise, could be salvific. in this case, what you have is the ability to. It's extremely different with a social Gnostic. You don't have this sort of removed spiritual, and then you just know it, and you're saved kind of on a spiritual level. You now have to remake the world. There's nothing to my knowledge, in any of the old cults where the goal of the Gnostic cult was to become the demiurge yourself. It was, in fact, to sidestep the demiurge and merge directly with the true deity. But now what you have in Marxism, I think very explicitly, especially Leninism very explicitly with his vanguard model, is this interest in becoming the demiurge in order to effectively undo demiurges. So we're going to be the demiurge that then sacrifices itself in some sense. And that's where Marx and Lenin are very focused on the state, when properly constituted as a dictatorship of the proletariat, will wither away of its own accord, leaving a stateless, classless society, which should be interpreted as a return to Eden. And so what you have there is this desire to be, in the social realm, the desire to become the tyrant, the desire to become the alienating force, the alien itself, that's alien to human experience. And so it's a very different and very dangerous phenomenon that I don't see direct parallels to in, the early church or in even in antiquity and other places. The idea that there's an evil, alienating force, and that to overcome it, we must become it and then undo it, I think is fairly novel to this sociological turn in these ways of thinking. And I think that if you don't understand, or at least have some sense that on some level that's operative, then you can't understand what they do and why they do it, even if most of what they do is intuitive to the belief system rather than something they've explicitly learned to do. You wouldn't talk to a Marxist, for example, and that Marxists say, well, we're going to become the controlling forces. Well, you would actually talk to a Marxist and they'd say we're going to become the controlling force of society so that we can unmake classes. They explicitly say that. That's the whole point of the seizing means of production. But you're not going to go talk to one of these kind of deracinated woke morons. They're not. You go talk to one of these, mid-tier gender people, and they're not. They just think they're helping people, overcome history of oppression. They have no freaking idea. But if you actually talk to some of the hardcore, if you read the queer theorists, they're very explicit that they're also seizing the means of production of what normativity is. Their goal is to seize the means of production of that which is considered normal and legitimate. And in fact, with the purpose of unmaking it, it's the exact same concept. But, your mid-tier people, I guess this is kind of a difference between Marxism and this deracinated woke horse crap, is that the Marxists kind of knew what they were doing, and these people, the vast majority of the people in the woke cult, don't have the slightest idea what they're doing. Right. They're just going along and thinking that they're doing the thing that makes them a good person or gets them a check mark in a social credit system.
Yeah, it's true.
I did a podcast at one point about, I said how Paulo Freire made Marxism stupid, and this is really what I was referring to.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I think it just goes to show you that the real, they. Well, I'm repeating myself, but yeah, I mean, the philologists, the German philologists in the 19th century, I mean, they did know what they're doing. I mean, it's real, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And not that I would roll the entire academy back to everyone learning, to everyone just, learning ancient Greek and Latin. But you can make the argument that today, if you look at some of the stuff that, like, say, Marx had to write when he was in university, it's like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? It's like, let's compare the piety of this saint to the piety of this other. I mean, it almost seems like, we're on maybe the other side of the coin in that respect. That as much social justice jargon that you can cram into your scholarship, then you're ushered along. And
yeah, that's why I just use the word deracinated for these people.
Right.
They're pulled up from their roots.
You mean that their scholarship?
It's thin. I mean, another term you could use is a term that's very common in kind of the structuralist or post-structuralist lingo is floating signifier. It's like their entire existence is a floating signifier. Like their whole philosophy is a floating signifier. They're deracinated from.
Right.
Well, I don't think Marx was. Marx knew where his roots were laid, and he was going to pull the whole damn thing up. These people operate in a completely different universe. The roots are, they don't know where the roots are laid. They don't have roots in anything.
Yeah, I was trying to read Saussure on a plane a few weeks ago. And, like Derrida was denied, his honorary doctorate at Cambridge. Somebody decided that this wasn't philosophy. And trying to read Saussure, it's like you don't, he, as far as I can tell, didn't know philosophy. You hear, like Derrida calls it like the transcendental signifier, right? Which is just, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but what you hear in, the studies departments, the rhetoric departments, the English departments, and you can sort of, in the classics departments, oh, that's the worst. But you can, when you hear these professors speak or this grad students, they really have a very, very thin grasp of philosophy. Like they like to sort of say the words, but it's clear that they don't understand what it's supposed to mean. And you can take the English departments. They used to be only classics, like 120, 50 years ago. Like English wasn't English as a domain wasn't invented, and then this whole thing just sort of took over, and now like I think you said before that it's really just like.
I mean, this is all a symptom of an ad hoc philosophy. They're not interested in understanding ideas or getting the ideas correct or attaching them to the places that they ultimately come from. They're interested in picking up ideas like screwdrivers or more like ice picks that they can stick into the bodies of their enemies. It's totally ad hoc. And I think that what you're describing when you describe your attempt to read Saussure is correct, first of all, but what you're describing is and these other professors and students that you deal with, this is ad hoc philosophy. It's what sometimes gets criticized in religious circles as cafeteria Christianity. You're just picking up ideas in order to cherry pick, whether you got them right or not, in order to do a job. And this is why postmodernism and post-structuralist thought came to the States and really became a thing at all. It wasn't because it was that popular in France or on the continent more broadly. It was because feminists picked it up as an ad hoc philosophy. And there's substantial evidence that while, they generally understood Foucault okay, people like Judith Butler and so on, did not understand Derrida at all and just kind of picked up his concepts as tools. The same with J.L. Austin's idea of performativity that inspired the gender performativity Butler put forth. She didn't understand what he was actually talking about, but she didn't need to because she had a different purpose. And the purpose was to convince the world that everybody on earth is always doing drag at all times. And there were only the elect few who know that they're doing drag, whereas most people are just going through the motions and reproducing a system of power. So now we've switched from Derrida over to to Foucault, they're reproducing like a network system of power that reinforces gender norms, gender expectations, gender presentation, and so on. So they're playing their part in a play that thus creates the play that creates the parts that will be the next performers. And this is just a bunch of circular garbage, but she picked up bits of philosophy from other people like J.L. Austin, Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, specifically in order to achieve some end, which was to say that gender is fake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Butler and her wife are not teaching here anymore, but their presence is, there's a strong pedigree here of a few things of Foucault, who was here giving the Howison lectures in, I guess, the 80s, and Heidegger, of course, because of Bert Dreyfus, and then, of course, Butler. And there's a Foucault class this fall. I bought the reader, but I don't really want to deal with Foucault before 11 a.m. And it's sad to me. I mean, here at Berkeley, they have one of two places. The other is the CUNY, where they've done this, what's called the Greek and Latin workshops. And it's like a 10-week sort of like special ops boot camp where, and they've been doing it for 50 years.
Yeah.
People come from all over to take these things. And it was one of the things I wanted to do before I got here, because I already had a predilection for Plato and for ancient philosophy. And of course, it's required for classic students to learn one of these two languages. And it was just such a disappointment to me. I mean, imagine, it's just so strange learning ancient Greek or Latin from a critical theorist, right? Somebody who's it says on their, on these grad students' bio, I guess I specialize in critical theory. It's like, I don't know, it's like going to China to learn English or something. It's like, and beyond that, it was just, it's really alienating. Well, there's no men, first of all. They're at a distinct deficit here, trying to do this. And if they are, there was one other guy in the program who was actually from a local seminary. But it's just, they talk about being marginalized or underrepresented. I mean, not only that, you're uncomfortable, you're kind of like tacitly maybe being harassed at any moment. And, there was one point where somebody said something that was pretty offensive about, cis heteronormative people. And, I'm glad the program still exists, right? And it's extremely rigorous. And it's one of the things that, if nothing else, I did that here. But just the level of the lack of breadth of reading from the graduate lecturers who do this, I can't even. It's like all the, like you said, it's a lot of, it's just memorization and repeating of stuff. And there's absolutely no, there's no understanding of any of the main ideas. Like you read Plato, what we read, the Apology in Greek over the course of half of 5 weeks. And just nobody has any idea what's going. None of the classics people seem to have any idea of what's going on in it. They just know how to conjugate verbs. And I don't want to be too insulting or anything, but God, what a disappointment in that respect.
It's a bit of a tragedy.
Yeah.
But that's the deracination of the fundamental knowledge necessary to understand the world you live in that we're kind of talking about more generally.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So the whole domain, like basically in the classics department, is like to liberate Sappho, right? Because like Sappho is the one female classics person, and so like that's all they do is they read. They basically read like Deleuze into Sappho. Like that's the job description. Yeah. So a lack of like the sort of they even have names for this stuff. Really, it's like they've now categorized philosophy within the last 100 years or more to like foundationalism versus coherentism, right? So like Stephen Hicks, right? I think he wrote his dissertation on foundationalism, but like it's the kind of thing that you or I or like pretty much anybody outside of the academy would just, that's the way they already think, is that there's like objective truth and whatnot, and the idea that that there's no foundation, that foundational knowledge is deracinated. I mean, it was just so clear to me because I don't think the philosophy department are the worst examples, right? I think that the worst examples are outside, and this was my sort of foray outside. But I was speaking with on the same trip a few weeks ago, a young lady at a small who was really interested in classics, and she didn't understand that for the most part at these big institutions, like big competitive schools, that like you're not going to get, they're not reading the ideas like out of Plato, or that she's familiar with, or that the ones that are the most impactful. And it was really sad to have to describe to, because she was thinking about studying here, and was like trying to learn ancient languages, and was like interested in archaeology, which is another offshoot of the classics departments, and she just did not understand that we're not focusing on theory of forms or theory of recollection or the form of the good, or any of the arguments, the ancient arguments for natural right, natural law, or any of the fun poetic stuff. It's just you read Guattari and Derrida into texts. You read gender into texts. And to continue on the point I was making earlier, is that in a lot of these, specifically like in Phaedrus, I don't know, I just find it really fun to tell you about this stuff, but he makes these etymological arguments about the sophists changing the names of words. I don't know if you've seen this.
Uh-huh.
And it's the same sort of thing you see now with with the postmodern scholarship. It's exactly, I mean, in Phaedrus, is it in Phaedrus or? Yeah, it's in Phaedrus, where he's talking about how they've changed the meanings of words from the old meaning. I mean,
same thing.
Yeah. But yeah, it's incredible to me. Okay, so I told my sister that I was talking to you today. She said, I asked her what she would ask you. She said, I would give him a big hug.
Well, I'll let you deliver it.
She adores you. And the other question was, so if you were off Twitter for a while, and I remember you described it as like being a relief from this addiction, but you're back on. How is that? How are you faring? I hate Twitter, by the way.
Sucks. In fact, I think this is a complicated thing to talk about because the fact that we can tell the truth and we don't have to worry about censorship nearly to the same degree is a true blessing. And I don't discount that. And I don't take it for granted, given that that was not the case on what we sometimes call old Twitter. But the fact is that, in my opinion, the algorithm makes the place virtually unusable. It's extraordinarily conflict-oriented in order to drum up engagement with the new structure. I'm a fan of the free speech, but the result of that is being subjected to an awful lot of starkly objectionable things kind of constantly in the form of outright hate, a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of open racism, which is, I mean, they're ideas, so people are free to say them, but it's objectionable to read it all the time. To have it delivered to your doorstep, digital doorstep in some sense. Not that I would call for any censorship or any of that, but it doesn't make it less objectionable. It makes it unpleasant to be on the platform. In part, the algorithm itself seems to make it more unpleasant to be on the platform. But it's pretty toxic. It's a dumpster. I mean, it used to be called a dumpster, and it's really actually crappy right now. On the other hand, it's the only digital platform in which, I mean, outside of Rumble, I guess, to a degree, and then, you know, social media platforms that nobody basically uses, Truth Social and Gab or whatever. It's about the only place that's mainstream that you can actually have free speech and get legitimate news. I feel like it's a psychological warfare battleground unlike any other. So I don't enjoy being on it at all. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to use a platform like that, but that doesn't mean I like it. And like I said, there's another aspect to it, which, you know, content moderation and censorship are not the same thing. And I'm not talking about whether or not we're going to moderate objectionable content. There is a lot of very dedicated targeted harassment that takes place on that platform, and it's worse now than it was in the past. And there it seems to be absolutely no interest in dealing with that problem in any realistic form, despite what the terms of service are very, very clear about. But I find that issue spreads to most of the other social media platforms as well. You would think that targeted harassment was something that they would take fairly seriously, since I'm almost positive if you were to harass the wrong identity groups anywhere except Twitter, that your result would be poor. But it seems that targeted harassment is not something they're all that interested in, at least not in general or at the broad concept. And that's certainly the case also on this new Twitter or X or whatever. So it's in my opinion, far more toxic environment than it used to be, but also an opportunity that I'm grateful to be able to disseminate ideas with less concern about censorship and repercussion for using speech. Having been kicked off, I understand the repercussions. I've been kicked off permanently from Facebook too, so I understand, you know, the loss of platform as a result of, you know, very benign things, honestly. Especially in the case of my Facebook banishment. It was extraordinarily benign. I just posted a meme with a joke on it, and it's not even an edgy joke, really. It certainly wasn't racially tinged or anything like that.
How long ago?
I guess it's probably getting on 1.5 or 2 years. It's been a while. But it was whenever the medical assistance in dying or MAID program was kind of taking off in Canada, the assisted suicide thing. And I just put out a joke and said that in socialist Canada, the suicide hotline calls you. And that was a lifetime ban from Facebook for that one.
Gosh.
On the pretext that I was encouraging self-harm, which is, of course, completely bogus.
Whatever reason they give, doesn't matter. I just can't. I can't imagine unless you have. I mean, there's people like, I don't know, if you're too big, they may not come after you, but I can't imagine the layers of bureaucracy that they must shove you under when you're non-compliant
But
Oh yeah, I'm currently, from what I'm told, fairly significantly shadow banned even on this new Twitter or X platform. So there's still that. That's still a phenomenon. I don't know the mechanism here. I know that I have a very large number of demerits in labels and tags on my account. One of the reasons I think that I'm shadow banned is because the toxic reply environment, because it's all advertiser driven, or almost all advertiser driven. If you post things and very toxic replies tend to come into your reply space, which you have no control over, obviously, then you get labeled as a potential threat to advertisers, and you get these demerits and shadow bans and whatever else. And I've been under pretty nasty attacks by anti-Semites, straight up homophobes, racists, pretty consistently for a few months.
Yeah, I don't like it on there. I've had an account since 2009. I think just by virtue of growing up in the Bay Area. But my ability to sort of I came from the arts before going back to school. And so like a lot of my ability to size people up is like to make sort of aesthetic judgments is just like, I'm blind on there. Like, who is this? Like, you're some sticky kid and you're in a basement. Like, with like a anime emote, like Avi. Why am I here? Sort of. That's kind of my reaction to it. I don't know. I don't understand what it selects for, and I know a lot of people, sort of the frog Twitter sympathy, like it provided a community for people an outlet for people to, say what everyone was thinking. But yeah, I'm not a fan. I wish I understood it better, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's other things I'd like to ask you about. I had to. I don't know if you've ever looked at the domain of. You're very good on this. If you've ever looked at environmental ethics.
Yeah, a little bit. I haven't read it extensively, but ethics is the code word for social control, basically, that a lot of these people are using. And environmental ethics, of course, are going to be tied right into the whole climate change narrative, and therefore a huge impetus for social control under the guise of teaching people the correct way to behave in all circumstances.
Yeah. I had to read a lot of environmental ethics one semester here, and as soon as it's kind of like feminism, where they just seem like they're just throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Like feminism, like, okay, in my understanding, I have to be, to try to be a little diplomatic, is, they kind of grab from everywhere and apply it to this category. And it seemed to me like in environmental ethics, it was very similar. And there's even, of course, environmental, what do they call it? Climate justice, right? Which segues into feminism.
Environmental justice and climate justice.
And so, I was the whole time trying to sort out, like, what is the relationship between these environmental ethics scholars and, the UN and all the, and like, why do they need to bring up like Marcuse and environmental ethics? Like, what? It was just so bizarre. It was like the strangest. I still am unclear on what to do with it. But
label it communist and move on.
Yeah, I think so. But it's this whole field, right? It's this whole academic field.
These are just ad hoc arguments constructed around critical theory and other things they think are authoritative so that they can grab power. And the people directly participating may not realize that's the agenda behind these ideas. But
Right.
it's how they've been, in a sense, like you're describing there at Berkeley. It's how they've been programmed to think. It's how they've been programmed to analyze. They've learned to read Marcuse into the environment. They've learned, but others among them are disciples. I mean, there are many people to this day who are still disciples of Marcuse. And I would suggest that some of those people are involved, possibly even in setting trends or suggesting younger researchers take that tack. And I use the word researcher there very loosely. These people aren't researchers. They do research-like things. It's, again, Potemkin or Kabuki research. They read things, they cite things, they don't necessarily understand them. It doesn't really matter. It's like they do the play acting, the performance of research.
My conclusion was kind of just that this is just some academic arm of just a larger globalist narrative. Yeah, it was just paper after paper of just like they would cite things that were wrong. They would try and like do mashups of like Aristotle and whomever else, and it was just like so strange.
They have an agenda, and they need the appearance of documentation that supports it. And there's an incentive structure that provides researchers incentives to produce lots of it, even if they don't know that what they're doing is producing a bogus legitimation pool.
Yeah, well, I think towards the end of my degree program is when I finally bit the bullet to take that class, and then also what they call the American Cultures requirement here at Berkeley, which is a school-wide sort of committee approved. It's approved by a certain committee of the ASU or the Student Senate or somebody. List of classes, right? Which is like you got your, justice and data science class, and your the original American Cultures requirement class was here as the philosophy of race, ethnicity, and citizenship. But anyway, so there's just kind of like it's been required since the 90s, and I think that was probably the worst part of the degree program here. It's not only having to read this like goofy stuff, which you've done plenty of yourself, but like the fact that no one around you understands like how wrong, how like off it is. Like there's no, your sense making just is gone. Like, and the other students, the kids, like don't really understand, like, and the professors, who knows what they think. Yeah, environmental ethics, and then the American Cultures requirement here. Gosh, it was painful. Even the metaphysics class that I took here, which should be, it was like metaphysics, like the entire textbook to me just seemed like metaphysics from a skeptic's perspective, or metaphysics from a materialist perspective. And I just could the whole time, I had the idea that like, well, somebody earnestly knows that like, okay, if you get to the metaphysics, then you've gotten to a lot, right?
Right.
So if you can teach a metaphysics class from this textbook that is, a chapter written by Sally Haslinger on whatever gender, the metaphysics of gender, then where else are you going to go from there? I mean, you've now captured the curriculum in a very meaningful way. And
Mhm.
of course, for 4 months, nobody is the wiser, and I've not even the professors. And so it can be very intellectually destabilizing to the point of almost intellectual bullying at times, in my experience.
I feel
But,
like that's a good description.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to take any more of your time. We've done quite a while. And thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
Is there anything, what are you currently working on? Is there a book that works?
I've
Aside
kind of
from-
started a few. I haven't really gotten very far into any of them. I decided I needed to do more research for one. I wasn't sure if I was qualified to write a second one. I haven't really started the third beyond an outline. So I've kind of got all these projects that are sort of started but haven't gone anywhere. I'm kind of, I guess, therefore more in a reading and research phase than I am in a production phase. I'm keeping up with putting materials out for people and trying to do sort of a side project of introducing more of the basic ideas, kind of starting places rather than just keep plowing forward. But yeah, it's sort of a more reading, less writing kind of moment. Plus keeping up with the crazy political environment given the election. That's distracting.
How do you stay psychologically healthy with Twitter and the election?
Go outside a lot.
Yeah.
Put it down and go outside a lot. Spend a lot of time outside interacting with physical reality, which can't lie to you.
Touch grass, as the mathematicians
As they say.
Yeah.
A lot of touching iron, but lifting weights and things. But yeah, physical reality can't lie to you. And so you can start to reorient psychologically pretty quickly by getting off of the digital propaganda environment and getting out into, physical reality, even interacting in the social environment. So I spend a lot of that time by myself. And reality's reality. So it's actually reorienting pretty quickly.
Beautiful. I can't thank you enough. As long as I'm here, you are welcome on this campus to say whatever the heck you want to say.
I like that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, James.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to sign off now.
Okay.
Take care, buddy.